Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a list, a really interesting list, I think, of 16 all but unknown American symphonies. But really good American symphonies. I mean, this is really good music, and there's a lot of it. You know, one of the things I talked about is that historically we refer to the First Viennese School as the golden age of the symphony. Well, it wasn't. It was the beginning of the golden age of the symphony, but the real golden age of the symphony happened in the 20th century. It happened in all of those countries outside of Germany where romantic nationalism and national schools of music began to get composers writing symphonies because there were orchestras that could play them. It would really created the golden age of the symphony was the founding of the modern symphony orchestra. Before that, well, it was catch as catch can. If you wanted your stuff to be played and you wanted it to be played well, yeah, there were orchestras in every town or community or little thing, but they were not what you might say, you know, of a quality such as to inspire composers to write large symphonic works. And so we really are talking about the 1880s forward, when orchestral music generally, and symphonic music particularly, really got going. Before that, the major orchestras were theatrical orchestras. They were accompaniments to operas and plays and other things like that. But after that, we had real, honest-to-goodness, regularly constituted municipal symphony orchestras. And so composers wrote symphonies. Duh, right? Big surprise. Not least in the U.S., whose orchestral tradition, by the way, is exactly as old and continuous and synchronous with Europe's. Europe had nothing on the U.S. when it came to orchestras, and America had one thing Europe didn't, which was piles of money and rich people who would support the orchestras. Hence, the evolution of the great American orchestras, not just the big five, but all of the other ones that were, you know, sort of in their orbit. And so I want to talk about 16 really beautiful works that were written in fulfillment of the potential offered by the existence of great orchestras. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? You know, it's not surprising. Great orchestras lead to great music. Great violins lead to great violin music. Great pianos lead to great piano music. It's if you build it, they will come. That's what happened. And that's what happened historically. So here we go. Let's start. Walter Piston, Symphony No. 2. Now, this is a symphony that's been recorded a few times. Some people know it. It doesn't get performed. I actually played in it. When I had my community orchestra, we did it. It's just a beautiful, beautiful work. First-class example of that, you know, American neoclassicism. Pithy, concise, in recognizable forms, but still completely distinct in terms of its personal style of the composer. So, it's easy to find. Michael Tilson Thomas did it. It's on Deutsche Grammophon. There's a Gerard Schwartz one on Naxos. If you don't know the Piston Second Symphony, go listen to it. It's like 20 some odd minutes long. It's in 3 movements. It's easy to listen to and fantastically rewarding. After that, something a little tough and gnarly. Sessions, Symphony No. 6. This has been recorded on Argo. Sessions music, as I've said many times, is 12-tone or atonal, but it's melodic atonal. It's symphonic atonal. It has ideas, and they're recognizable, and you can follow them. And Sessions takes them through moods which we understand. That is happiness, sorrow. It's just in his own personal style. It's very gritty and quite challenging, but still, the workmanship and the logic and the intensity, it's all there. You just have to get to know it. You have to give it a chance. You have to listen to it more than once. You have to take your time and let it speak to you, or you can ignore it entirely. That's always your choice. So after Sessions, yes, Antheil Symphony No. 1, which is subtitled Zingareska, which is, who knows what Zingareska is, a gypsy thing. And what a Zingareska is doing in his first symphony, I have no idea. Antheil was known as the bad boy of music when he was in France for his ballet mécanique, which used all kinds of, what were they using? Things like, propellers and mechanical devices and percussion things. He did all kinds of crazy stuff. But afterwards, after his bad boy period, he became a rather interesting, he had a very interesting life. He became a journalist. He wrote Lonely Hearts columns, advice to people who were lovelorn, that sort of thing, in the newspaper. And he wrote a bunch of symphonies, which are kind of in the Prokofiev/Shostakovich school, almost socialist realist, and on American themes and various things. Very well crafted and interesting. And they've been recorded now by CPO and by Chandos. And the first symphony, the Zingareska, is really interesting, rich, exotic. It doesn't seem to come from anywhere or anybody that you'll ever recognize. He also, by the way, worked with the actress Hedy Lamarr, who was a major inventor on torpedo guidance systems during World War II. And he and Hedy Lamarr and Howard Hughes, got together. It's a very, very interesting story. It really is. But even more interesting is Symphony No. 1, a terrific piece. Absolutely first rate. So give it a shot. Next, Copeland, his dance symphony. We know the third symphony. Everyone listens to that. A few people listen to the short symphony. Even fewer people listen to the first symphony, either in the original version for organ and orchestra or in the revised version without the organ part. But who listens to the dance symphony? It's also been recorded. These things have all been recorded. And the dance symphony is really fun. It's based on his early ballets, which sound nothing like late Copeland at all. It's a late romantic, decadent style. Yes, there is the rhythmic impetus. It's a dance symphony after all. So there is that. But it's certainly a terrific piece of music by a well-known master that's virtually ignored. Antheil Dorati made a terrific recording of it on Decca, and there are several others as well. So give the dance symphony a shot. You'll be pleasantly surprised, because that is if you're open to other Copeland, early Copeland. But he was always incredibly talented, and the piece is just great fun. After Copeland, I've done a separate review of this. Florence Price, her Symphony No. 3. Now, 1 and 3 were recorded by, Nazgul Snezik-Yegin and the Philadelphia Orchestra. Pardon me, that's Yannick Nézet-Séguin and the Philadelphia Orchestra. And they are beautiful, beautiful American works, steeped in, African-American liturgical music, church music, and dance rhythms. And they were neglected completely until very recently. And they've popped up again, thank goodness, because of the guilt and shame that's been imposed on the classical music world, and rightly so. Really, it's really a first class. They're first class pieces. They really are. Some people have, written in the comments that they're worthless and uninteresting. I disagree completely. I think that they're well-crafted, sincere, melodically beautiful, and orchestrally very, very well-made pieces that deserve to be heard. And the third, so far anyway, seems to be her masterpiece, her great symphony. She wrote 4. The second has disappeared. But the third is a more compact symphony than the first. And her symphonies all have sort of a unique approach to form, which is a scherzo finale combination sort of thing at the end after a first movement and slow movement. It's a recognizable style. She had personal fingerprints. She had the character. She had the drive and the gift. So her third symphony and it's been recorded about 3 times already. It's definitely worth hearing. It's a first-class piece of music. Next, Howard Hanson, his Symphony No. 6. I love the Symphony No. 6. The Symphony No. 6 is a one-movement, 20-minute long, sort of based on the concept of Sibelius' Seventh, one of those one-movement contraptions. And everyone, when they listen to Hanson, they either know the romantic, Maybe a few people know the Nordic, number one, the earlier of the two. But his later works are completely ignored because everyone says, well, it's just same old, same old. Well, maybe it is. Who am I to argue? But it's awfully enjoyable, same old, if that's what it is. And just really vigorous. I think it's wonderful music. I really do. Yes, it's romantic. Yes, it's conservative. But formally, it's quite interesting. And the tunes are good tunes. And that's kind of what matters, isn't it? I mean, they're worth hearing. And so take one out. Give it a try. Go further than the old Romantic Symphony. It may surprise you. After Hanson, Peter Mennin. Which one have we got here? Symphony number 5. Peter Mennin is a very good composer. He really is. And his symphonies are contrapuntal and rich and full of musical, what's the word? Well, his later ones get very, very, very nervous and kind of angstful and mean and anguished. And the fifth is not that way. The fifth is more of, again, it's part of the school of American neoclassicism. And they're abstract and intelligent and very concise. He was a very neat composer. There was not a note out of place and not a note more than is necessary. He reminds me a little bit of, the Swedish composer who I just talked about, Dag Viren. Who someone said I should pronounce something like Virine or something like that. I couldn't care less. Anyway, for all I know, I'm pronouncing Peter Mennin wrong. Good music. And recorded by Howard Hanson, actually, on Mercury originally. It's a work well worth getting to know. And people don't know it, and people don't play it, and it's obnoxious. We should. I mean, especially in the United States, where America's own symphonic heritage and tradition is roundly ignored and abused and pissed on. It's so annoying. So annoying. This stuff should be played. It should be played all the time. It should be front and center in people's musical lives. Because that way, it will become popular. There's no reason it shouldn't. I mean, it's that kind of music. It's not dumbing down music. It's not populist music necessarily, but it's just good music. It's enjoyable music. And a lot of these pieces make wonderful first half symphonies, because they're not terribly long. So you could put them on a program, and you could have your big name soloist and your Brahms thing, and whatever draws the crowd in, and give them a little something new. Give them a little zotz. Get them thinking. Get them off their tired butts and make them realize that there's a world of music out there that's being completely dismissed and for no reason whatsoever, other than inertia, laziness, and insecurity, which is what a lot of it is, an inferiority complex. All right, I've vented. Next, I've talked about this symphony quite frequently. Robert Kurka, his Symphony No. 2. 2 superb performances, one on Albany, one on CD, with more music by Robert Kurka on that CD disc. Really good stuff. I mean, I think it's one of the great American symphonies. Another very, very concise, very, very personal and characterful work. I've talked about it so many other times, I don't have to do it again here. But listen to it. It's really good. So after Kurka, Lou Harrison. Oh, Lou Harrison is so bizarre. Symphony No. 4, his last symphony. Symphony No. 4 has a movement called something like Coyote Tales or something like that. It's got a narrator, and I hate narrators. Oh, God, I hate music with narration. But this is fun. This is the exception that proves the rule. These are very enjoyable because the Coyote Tales that's the American West, but the music is like Indonesian gamelan. And, Harrison was one of the Western composers whose music blends East and West, and he invented all kinds of, the American gamelan percussion things using brake drums and oxygen cylinders and stuff like that. I mean, his music is so extraordinary and such a fabulously eclectic mix of styles from everywhere and everything. It's exceptional. It's amazing. It really is amazing. Just delightful stuff. And his Fourth Symphony is a big, grand piece, and it's been recorded a couple times. Is that what that is? Okay, something in my glasses. It's absolutely fabulous. And Lou Harrison generally is fabulous. I mean, if you like his Fourth, you'll like his Third. Then there's the Symphony on G, which is 12-tone. I mean, there was nothing he did not do and do well. An amazing guy, absolutely amazing. And his gamelan pieces and percussion pieces and other music, it's a body of work unlike any other, and just wonderful. So Lou Harrison deserves a little credit, and that's been recorded on Argo, and really beautifully well. Let's see. Rochberg, Symphony No. 5, George Rochberg. Wonderful stuff. I've done a talk about him. He's one of my tough symphonists. There's another composer who started writing dodecaphonic music, but then after personal tragedy, the death of his son, he reverted to a more tonally based style. But I've stressed tonally based. That doesn't mean it's easy. The music is really, it's sort of like Mahler on steroids, I would say. It's very emotional, very intense, very, very, very intellectually rigorous. But, if you like Alan Pedersen, say, or those people, you're going to like Rochberg. He's like Alan Pedersen, but with more energy, or something like that. I mean, it's dark and it's brooding, but it's powerful, really powerful stuff. And very different from the neoclassicists. He had his own school of writing. And that's what's wonderful about all these symphonies. There's so much music there, so much personal music, distinctive, individualistic music. There's not one school. There's not one type. You have to savor them individually. And there's a lot to savor, as you can hear. So after Rochberg, oh yes, Dawson, the Negro Folk Symphony. This was Dawson's single symphonic masterpiece. He worked on it throughout his entire life. It was premiered and championed by no less than Leopold Stokowski. I don't know if he premiered it, but he certainly championed it. And it's been recorded 3 or 4 times. Stokowski recorded it. It's a beautiful, beautiful, sensitive work of a master. Dawson actually spent most of his life working in choral music as a choral music director, and a composer of settings of Negro spirituals and other choral pieces. And this was his one symphonic work. And the reason it was his one symphonic work, of course, is because black composers couldn't get performances for most of the 20th century. And there was no point in him working harder because he wasn't going to get the performances. He wasn't going to get played. It's sad. It's really sad. But at least we have this particular work, which is a flat-out masterpiece. It really is. It's full of it's a programmatic piece that describes in some ways the experience of the African American in the United States through slavery and anguish, and it's just an outpouring of feeling. And the fact that it's called Negro Folk Symphony might lead you to think that it's one of these sort of like cow gazing over a barn gate things, but it isn't. It isn't at all. First of all, you're not going to recognize the tunes. They're not the most obvious ones. They're based on spirituals, but they're not, the ones that it's not Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. These are tunes that have some sort of relationship to what the music's trying to express, and it's not, the object of the symphony is not to take all these tunes and pack them into symphonic form. It's to write a symphony with its own emotional and expressive journey that takes these tunes as the subject matter, the basis for that journey. And it's really a marvelous piece, and sort of an iconic piece in the history of American symphonic composition. So give it a shot. There are several performances that you can choose from, and they're beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful. So after Dawson, John Alden Carpenter. Now Carpenter, is known to the extent he's known at all for his ballet Crazy Cat and Skyscrapers, his modernist pieces. He also wrote the delicious Adventures in a Perambulator, which I've talked about a couple of times, that wonderful, witty orchestral suite. He was a very talented composer, and he wrote 2 symphonies as well, and they're on Naxos. You can get them. They are short, pithy pieces, but they don't sound like anybody else. He was heavily influenced by jazz, popular music, by the modern currents of Stravinsky and people like that going through, percolating through the musical ether. And these works don't sound like anybody else's. And they're well written, very, very well written, and very, very enjoyable. So give Carpenter a shot. He might surprise you. Then, Hovhaness. Hovhaness wrote, 67 symphonies or something like that? I don't know. There's just endless quantities of them. And they all sound like Hovhaness. I mean, if you know Mysterious Mountain, which was his Symphony No. 2, then you know Hovhaness. But I chose Symphony No. 50. Why not? It's the Mount St. Helens Symphony. It's, a lot of his symphonies deal with mountains. He was fascinated by mountains, and both the physical representation of mountains and their mystical or, sacred kind of, the imagery that they evoke in both Eastern and, Western music. And Mount St. Helens was, of course, the great volcano that blew up and killed some people, and it blows up in this symphony. It does it quite successfully, but the eruption will surprise you, because the eruption is not, it's not like Hekla. It's not like, John Leifs or Jan Leifs, from Iceland, the guy who is into doing literal representations of volcanic eruptions in Iceland with lava and rocks and anvils and chains and cannon going off and lava bombs flying through the air. This isn't like that at all. This eruption is a canon, actually. It's a canonic eruption, and not canon as in, boom canon, but canon as in the musical form of one part following another part, sort of, kind of. And the tune, and it has a tune, the tune that represents the eruption is extremely sort of Eastern style. It's a transmogrified spiritual eruption, but it's a lot of fun nonetheless. I mean, it's really entertaining, and it's a fun symphony to listen to, and you should give it a shot. I mean, pick any symphony by Hovhaness after Mysterious Mountain, and you'll probably have a good time with it. I mean, they are, if you like one, you're going to like the rest. That's how it works with Hovhaness. His style was his style, and you either like it or you don't like it. But Mount St. Helens is a great place to get into the later stuff, and you'll get a couple other symphonies on the same album. George Schwartz did it, of course, with the Seattle Symphony, because that's where Mount St. Helens was, out there in the Pacific Northwest. And it's really fun and a little bit different. So after Mount St. Helens, Morton Gould. Morton Gould was known, of course, for the Latin American Symphonette, for his popular works, for the many wonderful living stereo recordings he made with his orchestra, his pickup ensemble, including jungle drums. I love jungle drums. He did sort of classical pops things, but he was a very serious composer. He was championed by Dmitri Mitropoulos, the New York Philharmonic, and he wrote a lot of music for them, and it's really good stuff. His ballet Fall River Legend, about Lizzie Borden, who took an axe and gave her father 30 whacks, her mother, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 31. That story. It's a great story. And the Third Symphony of Morton Gould is a major American symphony, powerful piece of music. Again, it's not easy music. It's recognizably American. It's recognizably tuneful, but it's a serious symphonic piece of orchestral mayhem. I mean, it's really well written, and it's intense, and it's really pretty nifty stuff. And it doesn't deserve its neglect at all. There's a very fine performance on Albany, and it deserves to be heard far more frequently than it is. It's just a tragedy that music like this is ignored, I think. Really gets me really annoyed. So after Morton Gould, Don Gillis, also on Albany. Now, Don Gillis is a wonderful composer. I mean, he is a populist composer in the best sense of the term. His more serious, larger works, to the extent that anyone even knows they exist, are completely ignored. He's only known now for Symphony No. 5½, that jolly little jeu d'esprit, which Toscanini recorded. Well, he played it, he didn't record it, but there's one out there that he did somewhere in some radio broadcast land. And the No. 5½has been recorded several times, at least 3 or 4. and it's deliciously funny. But I chose his Symphony No. 4, which is subtitled The Pioneers. It's an innocent and noble exploration of the American pioneering spirit. It's not tacky. It's not ridiculously sentimental. It has its origins in the popular music idioms of the 30s, 40s, that era, 50s. But it's just a marvelous piece of writing and a big, serious piece. And it's worth hearing because Gillis wrote 12 and some odd symphonies, and they're all on Albany, and you should hear them. They're really, really cool. They're different. They're extraordinarily personal. They're a unique body of work that's part of that wonderful symphonic tradition that we are in the process of disregarding to the extent possible. Thank God for recordings. It's all I can say. And to wrap up this tale of 16 virtually unknown but eminently worthy American symphonies, Ned Rorem, Symphony No. 3, which exists in a couple of performances. Bernstein did it. It's in one of those New York Philharmonic boxes. But the best one is Jose Cerebrier's recording on Naxos, which contains the 3 Rorem symphonies. The third is just a masterpiece. It's one of the great American symphonies. And its neglect is unaccountable, as it is with all of these symphonies. And it's superb. A perfect masterpiece that Rorem never attempted again. He wrote a lot of concertos and other orchestral pieces, but he gave up on symphonies after the third, which is a shame because he was really good at it. And well, maybe that was the right thing to do, right? One flaming masterpiece and then retire from the stage when it came to symphonic composition. I don't know. All I know is that this thing is terrific, and you're going to love it. It is an immediately recognizable American creation, but at the same time, a fabulous piece of symphonic thought and totally individual to the composer. Its lyricism, its sort of bittersweet harmony, and it's just wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So there you have it. 16 really first-rate American symphonies. Go forth and listen. Keep on listening. Thanks for joining me. Take care.